France and the United States are supposed to be very close to concluding an agreement of taking the interest on the money that they have frozen from Russia's assets and giving it to the Ukrainians. If they did that to them, what's to say they can never do that to us?
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vierra, part of the outreach team of Silver Bullion here in Singapore, where we want to help you truly secure your wealth. Peter Grandich joins us today. Peter entered Wall Street back in the mid 1980s with neither formal education nor training, and within 3 short years was appointed head of investment strategy for a leading New York Stock Exchange member firm. Peter would go on to hold positions as chief market strategist, portfolio manager for 4 hedge funds, and a mutual fund that bore his name. Peter has been featured on Good Morning America, Fox News, CNBC, with dozens more, to name a few. And we're delighted to have Peter join us once again today. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Peter Grandich. Peter, welcome back to SBTV. How are you doing?
Good to be back with you.
Glad to have you back once again, Peter. I want to start off with a recent article I saw where the World Gold Council says the gold mining industry is struggling with sustained growth. They cite it's harder to find gold, get permits, finance it, operate it. Do you see the same, or do you see something different?
I think they're pretty well on the mark, especially as you go down the food chain down to the explorers. First, overall, as I was telling you before we started, the industry itself that used to be involved in building positions has dissipated. For starters, 10 or 20 years ago, when financial advisors, we were called brokers before that, we built part of all our book around businesses of buying and selling junior resource stocks. That's a dinosaur. There may be a handful of people left, but no one really does that for commission. And so that entree for a junior resource company in particular to the end user, the retail buyer, has dramatically changed. It's much, much tougher now. Even if all those end users still exist, which I don't believe they do, and I'll tell you why in a moment, you still have to reach them in a much more one-on-one basis or an alternative, which I haven't seen replica yet what financial advisors used to bring. The other thing is the competition. And I've been quoted as saying, even though I don't like it at all as an investment, cryptos, it's been eating the junior resource market's lunch. It's taken away the people that might have otherwise in the past found themselves in the junior resource market for speculation. And instead, they bought into one of the greatest stories that even the tulips are jealous of, that they've created this phenomena of better than the wheel and fire being created altogether. But that and also compliance. Here in the US, Patrick, it's very hard, even if a financial advisor wants to, or even an individual through a discount broker, to buy stocks that trade up in Canada, even if they have an OTC symbol. Many of the firms here prevent it or make it that the stock has to be at least $5, which basically eliminates a lot of the juniors. So it's much more challenging. And we didn't even talk about the social, political, and economic issues that are going around the world, where you and I could have been at a conference 20 or 30 years ago, spin a globe, land anywhere, and say, yeah, we can go there. Not anymore. That the world has shrunk. For me, it's shrunk to just to be looking in North America in the twilight of my career. But I certainly believe it's far more difficult now to be a miner than any other time in the 40 years that I've been in and around this industry.
Okay, yeah, we'll surely touch on some of the things you just mentioned, but you mentioned the dinosaurs, how it has kind of gone the dinosaur way. Could you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, so if you think about it, at a typical gold conference, which there was one or two a month throughout North America, and of course in Asia and Europe at the time, there would literally be dozens, if not hundreds, of financial advisors who part or all of their business was looking for the next mining stocks to buy. And when they did, dozens or if not hundreds of their clients, depending how big a business they had, were told to buy the stock. And that just doesn't happen anymore because commission driven brokerage business is down 95%. Everything is an asset gathering, a fee based kind of situation. So even if all those end users that used to buy those things through brokers even if they were still in the market, the mining company has a much more challenging time to reach them now because they used to have to go to one person to get to two, 300. And that is, I think, one of the key reasons why, despite much higher metal prices, we've not seen a correspondence in the actual share prices.
Yes, I wanted to touch on that a bit because we do see mainstream media almost promoting stocks, promoting things like Bitcoin, and but they're kind of concealing the potential with the metals, including the miners, considering central bank buying, the backing of a BRICS currency, the value of a neutral reserve asset such as gold when dollar and fiat issues of trust exist. So, my question here, why do you think the mainstream media, they're really not letting people see these other options out there that could really help them?
Two reasons, Patrick. The single biggest is no advertising dollars there. They make an awful lot of money from the financial service firms that are pushing all the crypto types of currencies. And therefore, that's what they build around. The second is there's always been a Rodney Dangerfield, who was an old comedian that used to say he never got any respect. And gold has never gotten the respect. In fact, it's been treated like kryptonite by the general financial community, at least in the US, for as long as I've been in it. It's an amazing phenomenon when you talk, especially to young financial advisors. I just gave a talk to a few couple weeks ago, and I say, can you name the three tier one investments in the world that are recognized as the single best? And of course, they say stocks and bonds, but they never can guess the third one. And I tell them it's gold. And yet, none of you, and none of them did, have any exposure or your clients to it. Why is that? And why has something for a couple thousand years where certain currencies and paper monies have come and gone, and this thing can still buy what it used to buy 100 years ago, 500 years ago, and you don't have any? And the last thing I'll just say, Patrick, when I sit in our planning business with our clients, prospective clients, when I tell them, listen, I want you to buy some gold and hope it doesn't go up, they all look a little strange, Patrick, and they all say almost the exact same words. Mr. Grandich, why do you want me to buy something that you don't think is going to go up? Well, I tell them, because if it does, what you own a lot of is likely going the other way. And that's the big missing ingredient, I think, to gold. And what I think has happened to it is that people who have seen that value, particularly out of Asia and your area of the world, and because of what's happening with the BRICS. I'm a big believer, Patrick. I don't want to jump all over, but I'm probably one of the biggest voices that are positive in what would be called Main Street, Wall Street still at these days, on the belief of where BRICS are going and how negatively impacted countries like the United States are going to be. And I think part of that is because they recognize gold, and gold will be some part of their whatever it is, alternative currency, some type of trade way, digital support to gold. But that I believe they are going to be a big believer in. And let me just say this: I believe the BRICS will be to world trade in the next 3 to 5 years the impact the same as the Industrial Revolution had on world trade.
Right. I remember you mentioned the BRICS a while back, and you were early on, you were saying how their gold backed currency could, in a sense, not necessarily bring in, but as you said, coincide with US political, social, financial trouble. And that outlook of instability of the US and now the stability of the BRICS, is that going to, it surely is going to weaken the dominance and influence the US holds. But do you think it's also going to push investors on the other side of the world?
Well, I think they already are, and I think when you see that, uh, I think there was too built of a high expectation for last year's results when there were just a handful, but now it looks as many as 40 countries are ready to sign and become a part of it. And my understanding there's as many of those that have now going through the process of what it would be like and all. And I think a key thing happened a couple of weeks ago, Pat, that really got no coverage in the US, but I think it's key to this belief. France and the United States are supposed to be very close to concluding an agreement of taking the interest on the money that they have frozen from Russia's assets and giving it to the Ukrainians. And if you want to see more countries want to run away from the United States, because they have to ask themselves, well, listen, if they did that to them, what's to say they can never do that to us? And I think that would be the straw that breaks the camel back, and it'd probably be the single biggest advertisement for the BRICS to interest other countries, if and when that's concluded. And I suspect it will be concluded fairly soon.
If you're enjoying this interview with Peter Grandich and I, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and giving it a thumbs up. And did you know that at Silver Bullion, there are 6 different types of accounts to fit your needs? To find out more, go to www.silverbullion.com.sg, click on the signups tab, and choose from these 6 types of accounts. Or email me, Patrick at silverbullion.com.sg, and I'll help to get you started. Or I saw a video where U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, he kind of let some things slip out where he mentioned the deal with Ukraine is the resources there, and I guess because we are in a world today where resources are so important, especially considering the BRICS, for one thing, and you're seeing the West trying to struggle and grapple or grab onto whatever resources they can. Do you think this is part of the reason why we are seeing so much effort go into Ukraine?
Well, I think that's part of it, but I think it's even a bigger picture. I think one of the things COVID taught, other than the fact that it was basically a fraudulent pandemic overall, it taught that globalization really didn't work, because we saw once what transpired. Many countries saw that they didn't have the natural goods to produce for themselves, and were dependent on places where perhaps they weren't even friendly nations to them. The other thing, of course, is the critical mineral, and that's most minerals. It's not just rare earth type of minerals now. We concluded that we don't have the supply that's going to be needed, and it's not just Ukraine. It's part of also Taiwan, because of Taiwan's uh, such usage for semiconductors and how critical they are to everyday business world. It's even countries like Afghanistan, which America spent God knows how many trillions of dollars left, and now they too are recognizing how they can monetize their resources as well, even in the Middle East. So this battle for critical minerals is just starting, and the United States and many of the European countries are playing with one hand behind their back for years and years of neglecting it. Not that some of us don't have that ability to find it, but here, this present administration that we have has done everything against natural resources since it's taken over, starting with oil and gas and moving right through critical minerals, where it even shut areas where some places it looked like we could add to that. And it won't change overnight, even if there is an administration change. And let's face facts: China is a dominant player in that, and they have their hands all around the world, making deals and gathering up all the resources and then some. And they are the clear leader in that movement.
I guess sticking with the U.S., the words freedom, they're tied into other words like liberty, justice, truth. With those 3 words, today, truth is not whatever person wants to believe. Justice has become a tiered type of a justice, and liberty is being sort of boxed in where you can have as much liberty as you want as long as you don't offend the next guy or the next pronoun. With this, how do investors navigate in markets where there is so much ideological, political, geopolitical uncertainty?
Well, Patrick, it's been a challenge for me because I wear my Catholic Christian faith on my sleeve in my work. You can look over my shoulders. I'm never going to be bashful till the day I die, and even if I have to die for that faith. But we've moved to a far more secular, woke type of relativism. We moved towards where a very small handful of people who don't think like the majority, they get what they want, and you as the majority have to accept it. And it's become now to the point where I think it's reached exhaustion, into where people say is starting to say enough is enough, and that is the type of political challenge now that is developing here in the U.S. The Trumpsters, or whatever the opposite want to call the MAGAs, or whatever the case may be. They are people that are basically falling back and going, oh, wait, this went too far, too fast, and no one else is speaking on our behalf. And that's why we're supporting him. We may not like him because of how nasty he could be or whatever the case may be, but he's the only one that's standing up for us. And quite frankly, I think that movement's only going to grow stronger. And I think unless they're able to do much more in the way of political shenanigans on election days, there could actually be a rout. I think most Americans, the vast majority, even those that might have been considered in the middle of the road independents or even somewhat liberals, are moving more back to center or to the right, even though the media focuses on the small minority that's moving over to the left and more of the left. So it's setting up. I will say this, Patrick. I don't think Wall Street has started to price in what political outcome could be. And that'll probably start once we get into July and August as we approach these conventions. And even if that means, and I'm speculating, I don't believe Biden will be the person on election day for the Democrats. I really believe there's going to come a change for a lot of reasons. His health, first of all. But no matter what transpires, the political impact is not yet playing itself out in the financial markets, but it will.
Okay. I guess kind of tied into this is that there is the thought that the rule of law is breaking down in some ways in the U.S. and should that breakdown become more blatant, become more obvious, would we see investors, businesses, or business owners looking really to move their assets out of the U.S.?
Well, I get that asked a lot, far more now than any other time in my career. So let me tell you this. A few months ago, I wrote something saying that there were 5 key reasons to now build a financial arc. I certainly got to the point where I've been the most skeptic about the health of the future, economic, socially, and politically. So the 5 reasons are: one, everybody knows because we talked about it a long time, but it's really come acute now, and that's the debt and deficits. We're getting to the point now where we're really going to struggle to pay the interest. Forget about the amount of the debt. The second problem in the U.S. is a retirement and aging crisis. 65% of Americans are working paycheck to paycheck. They're never going to reach the beautiful commercials that they see about living their last part of their life in somewhat luxury. And they're going to be more of a financial strain on the government. There's an aging problem. As boomers peak, which in the next 2 years we will, and as we start to die off, and unfortunately we're all going to die off eventually, that money is going to shift. It's going to shift to the younger ages. And wherever the money is, so will be the political power. So there's going to be somewhat of an aging crisis. The third is the immigration. Listen, I don't get into the debate of how many people are terrorists or whatever it may be, but I do know this much. The bulk of the people coming are just trying to seek a better life. Wherever they're coming from, what they're being given here is much, much better. Deserving or not, I'm not here to debate, but I do know this. Most of them are just coming with their shirts on the back. So there's going to be a tremendous economic strain continuing, not only in our federal level, but our state and local levels. The fourth, we already discussed, the BRICS. I think Wall Street is totally uh, mistaken what this is going to mean and how it's going to impact us. And finally, the fifth problem is political paralysis. You would think any of those problems could be fixed if government could work together. Well, not only do our two parties don't want to be in a room with each other, but they now have a fracturing within their own parties, where in the Democrats there's a core moving even more left, and the Republicans there's a core moving more right. And I don't think there's on any political will or can be if and when these situations I see become so acute that even the average person sees them. So it's very hard for me to have a very positive outlook. And to answer your question, those who can afford it and those who can arrange it are indeed seeking to hold money outside the U.S. And it's probably offshore investing, which is much more tighter for Americans to do. It's not as easy as it was 20 or 30 years ago, but you're allowed to do it legally if you go through that process. And there are a lot of those questions coming up, especially from people of means. When I dealt with athletes here that made tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, they were already in the process. And if it wasn't from our advice, it was typical advice that's coming from high net worth wealth advisors. Take a portion of your money, not only move it out of dollars, but move it out of the country if you can.
Right, right. When I talk to pretty wealthy people, that what they tell me is, Patrick, there's a time to make money and there's a time to protect what you've made. And a lot of these guys, they are in protection mode. So yeah, completely agree with that.
Yeah, that's my theme when I talk to our clients. I leave them with potential clients. It's not how much you're going to make going forward, but how much you don't lose, which is going to separate you from the winners versus losers.
Yeah, absolutely. Those points you just made, I'd like to just break them down a little bit, one by one, starting with the debt. What does the US tell the world, tell even its own people, when we cannot even pay the interest on the debt? I mean, are we going to be taxed more? Will we sell off assets? Because neither of these, I don't think, can be sustainable.
Well, our Congressional Budget Office, which is really the last place in Washington where there's any bipartisanship left, now says that we're going to be at $54 trillion in hard debt in less than 10 years because of how much more now the deficits are growing. You start to think about that, even at 50 trillion, and you just put a 5% interest rate on it, that's 2.5 trillion in interest expense. 20 20 sorry 2022, we took in 5.3 trillion dollars in income as a country. Now some of that'll grow, but you'd be talking about half of all our income going to just pay interest expense. And let me just throw in something to show you how silly this current administration is. We have gone against our Supreme Court, our president, and has gone ahead and started forgiving student loans for billions of dollars, even though the Supreme Court basically ruled they couldn't do it in the way that he's doing it. And so now people say, well, how important is that? And I tell them the single largest asset on the US books is student loans. It's 27% of the US assets. So now that asset is no longer going to be on that side of the ledger because you're forgiving it, but you're still counting on that as potential income for future. So now you have to raise taxes. So a guy like me and others that either paid for their kids' college or the kid paid off or is paying off their student loans now also are going to be extra taxed simply because that person over there was forgiven something that A, they weren't cheated. They basically got the same rates as everybody else. They got the same opportunity for an education. And the other thing, Patrick, that people don't want to talk about on Wall Street is, where does that stop? Do we next do that for mortgages, people? Do we do that for people with consumer loans? And how do we do all of that? And listen, you're right. People around the world are recognizing this, and that's why China has sold so much of its holdings of our bonds, and other countries are moving that way because they just recognize that sooner or later, the only way out of this really is going to be to dramatically print money like it went out of style and inflate our way out of it. So even though today we're reacting, as you and I speak, of lower consumer prices, and that's all, the bottom line at this is the two choices to get out of that situation, both are bad. Heavy deflation, depression like, or really, really let the printing presses go and have lots of inflation and monetize that debt. Either one is no good. I'll tell you this much. People my age, I'm 68, Patrick, are not going to pay as dear as a price of the people that are half my age or even grandchildren type. They're going to be the ones facing this horrible burden of a debt load. And Patrick, that debt is not just on the federal level. Most of our states are indebted. Most of our states are not balancing their budgets. And I can't tell you, and I can tell you that 7 out of 10 families that I still see today looking for planning advice are living at least one financial lifestyle above themselves, and they're doing that through borrowing as well. So that is the biggest 34 letter word in my vocabulary in my work here.
Right. I was also going to ask you about the Social Security, because is this something where should we be taking that big pot of retirement money? let's say, put it into investments to try and get that money to grow instead of fixing potholes? Or are we going to have to hire more government employees to keep a sort of a Ponzi scheme going? Or are we looking at maybe something like MMT, where, like you said, they are will probably have to print money, and they're just going to come up with something like MMT and not care how much they're going to print?
Well, the first thing they'll do is, and they're already pushing towards it, and it'll happen after this election, they'll raise the age from 65 to 70, it looks like. They'll also start to lower the amount of money you can have or earn in order to still collect it. So they'll start taking out some of the real wealthy people who supposedly still get Social Security. But it's a failed process. It was failed from the day one, and it never was invested the way it should have been. And if you think about how much they took out from you and what your purchasing power was then and what they're giving you back now, it was a poor thing. And it was all based on at a time when the living age was under 65, and no one back then thought of, hey, what happens if people start living longer? This program won't work. But here it is, and it's just one of the many problems of a government that's become so indebted, and that people are going to count on it, because as all those people have issues that we spoke about, they're going to turn to the government and say, you gotta help us. And it's going to get to the point where when the BRIC nations really take hold, and I don't think it's more than 5 years, I think it could be as early as three, and we're really outside looking in as a country, then I think wholesale amounts of funds will be leaving this country, and then it'll be really a really trouble. That's why I tell everybody it's not tomorrow that you need to have the ark built, but you should build it now, because within 2 to 3 or 4 years, it's the only thing that's going to keep you afloat. Because if you're still heavily indebted, you didn't live a less is more lifestyle. I'm a big believer in reducing or not having debt. You're going to have a lot of major problems. Not too far off now, Patrick. It's not way yonder. It's really just around the corner.
But when they look at mainstream media, they're still hearing things are financially pretty good. They're still seeing the stock markets, at around all time highs again. Oh, how do they take in this advice when we're trying to protect them, but they see happy days all over the place?
Well, you said a key word. I call it the "don't worry, be happy" crowd, which makes up most of our financial security industry. I'm convinced you can toss most of them off our Empire State Building and all the way down, Patrick. They'd all say the same thing. Hey, so far so good. You're right. There are blinders on. There's there's a sense, but where we're starting to see, where I can tell you just from our planning businesses, people that are very involved in the economy, and that's business owners or high executives, they see a lot worse things now than existed 5 or 10 years ago. They're the most likely ones to listen to what we're saying about building the ark and become clients. The average person that's just still working, like you said, may have a financial advisor, has some money for them, retirements and all, and just goes to work and turns on regular television. Yeah, they don't see it as bad, but so many people have fallen, have not moved forward. There's a small group. People who say that 1%ers, 10%ers, whatever the number is, that has done well these last few years. The rest of Americans have at best held their own, or really deteriorated or fell. And there's a lot more of them. And how we know that, Patrick, you can talk to anybody in the food pantry business anywhere in the country. They'll tell you that lines are 5 times longer, and the amount of working class people now that are getting on those lines have increased dramatically. So you're right, they're still, in a sense, getting the wool pulled over their eyes by some, but a lot of people are starting to see it for what it's really about. But what you get is, even those that see it, they'll say something like this to me: well, Mr. Grandich, I really think you're right, but I'm praying you're wrong. Because they just can't bring themselves. It's not the way we've been trained to think and go about that process. And that's why I always like to joke, Patrick. I'm certain when Noah was building that ark, it was sunny and 80 degrees, and everybody on the shore was laughing at him. But the rains eventually came, and those that weren't in the boat, well, we all know what happened to them.
Amen there. Peter, you also touched on political paralysis. Why do you think the government has lost its will, its way, its promise to the people? Because from where I'm at, looking back overseas, back in the U.S., it's sort of turning into some sort of an oligarchy in many respects.
Well, my big argument, and this is where I lose 75% of potential clients, Patrick, if not more. When you strip away all the things we talked about, economic, social, political, and you get to the rawest center of all of this, for America at least, is we moved away from what the country was built on, and that was a belief in an almighty God and one way, a Judeo-Christian type of way, and we allowed relativism and all these other things to take hold. And in just a couple of generations, that effect has led to these issues. Nobody that was raised 30, 40, 50 years ago or was around then who could ever look and turn on the TV today and believe this is the America that they were in the 40s, 50s, even up to the 60s and 70s. And that is not uncommon, the fact that so many people now have become agnostic or atheists. And for me, it's more of a challenge because you're only viewed one of three ways when you do put God on your sleeve. You're either a charlatan, meaning, and there are people that use it just to take money from others. There are some that go, I don't care what you believe, can you make me money? And then there's a small minority still, thank God, that say, boy, I can't believe there's somebody that recognizes that and thinks that way. I'm glad I met you. But I really think stripping everything away, Patrick, and I know you're a believer as well, is that no matter where in the world it is, the more we've moved away from the principles, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Christian, just the Ten Commandments, the moral fabric, that fiber that people lived in all parts of the world, has been basically torn apart or destroyed in some places, and in its place is a vacuum of evil or failed human natures, and I like to say to you, I wish there was a sign that was turning back, but I think it's only deteriorating, getting worse.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. Last question here, Peter. When you look at money today, you hold a coin in your hands or a dollar note, whatever it might be. And with your faith, you see these words, "In God we trust." What does it what does it mean to you? What is it, does it have as much meaning as it once did, perhaps?
Well, for me, it does. I don't think society does. And I'll tell you why. People can either look at the Holy Bible as just a simple historical book. It has great stories, has meant a lot. A lot of things what were said in there proved out to be true and all. Or you can look at it as the word from Almighty God. No matter how you look at it, the matters of finance have so much part of the book. A matter of fact, things related to money are half the parables, and there's more verses on things related to money than there is about heaven or hell, which you think would be the ultimate topics of that book. And so those who still believe in that and approach it that way look at money in a totally different spectrum than I think much of Wall Street does. And just, Wall Street would tell you in a poll, if they took it, that they would say the guy that owns the bus company is always happier than the guy driving the bus. Why? Because he has the ownership and money and all these things that come with it. But in real life, some of the happiest people you will meet will be people with little or no means, and I can't tell you how many, especially when I worked with athletes for 20 years, how many people with lots of money were really, really unhappy and not living in peace. So, in God we trust probably is more of a just an old saying. I don't think most people look at it this way, but our founders did. In the first couple hundred years, we believed in it, but we moved so far away from that. As much as people say, make America great again, and to think we're going to turn it back to what 50 years ago, I don't think so. I think the best that can happen is we can stop it from getting even worse.
Amen to that. Completely agree. And it all does start with you and me, and then each of us on our own. Peter Grandich, before we head out, can you tell us how we can follow you and about petergrandich.com?
Sure. So petergrandich.com, we do an alternative to traditional financial planning just for U.S. restaurants, but most of my commenting, and I've learned to say X. I still like saying Twitter better than X, but most of my commenting and all is done on X, and there's also a YouTube channel where interviews such as yourself that I put up, and occasionally I do some on my own. And thank you very much, Patrick, because I know I can speak freely here and also be able to share about my faith and not fear that I'm not going to be invited back again, which happened on major networks. One of the major reasons I'm not back on is because I brought up my faith and they said, listen, if you're going to do that, it's best you not come back. And I said, okay, bye bye.
I don't intend to censor any of that. I think my three rules: never mess with the man's family, his livelihood, and his faith. Always respect those things, and they can surely go a long way.
Amen.
All right, thank you, Peter. So once again, I want to thank you. And again, I know you are a man of faith. I pray your spirit remains strong and you continue to be a light for us.
God bless you. Thank you, Patrick.
That was Peter Grandich sharing his views on precious metals and the economy. To see more of Peter's views and work, please go to www.petergrandich.com. If you like this video, please do subscribe, share, and give it a thumbs up. All are greatly appreciated. Audio-only versions of this interview can be found on iTunes and Spotify.